going to take a look right now at the Steinberg Cubasis app. It's very similar in its layout as its parent application, Cubase, for the PC and Mac. One of the main uses for Cubasis is to send MIDI data out to outside apps and have it all contained in one place, one destination. So far, there is no all-encompassing DAW on iOS, but this is as close as it gets as far as I've come across. So I'm not going to deal with audio right now because that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm just going to deal with MIDI. So I'm going to remove the audio track, and we have a MIDI track that's not been connected yet. So I'm going to use Audio Bus. Interapp audio is also supported in Cubasis, but I found it very buggy, so I wouldn't recommend using it right now. Eventually, the promise is that Interapp audio will work flawlessly, but that might take some time as it gains support. So on my output, I'll have Cubasis, and I'll connect Nano Studio as my input. So going to Nano Studio, I have to configure the Midi setup for all the apps that I end up wanting to route to Cubasis for Midi. So each app has its own way of doing it. Usually it's in the settings section. Here it is in Midi. And we'll have Omni enabled and Midi enabled for Cubasis. And we'll send, to make things simple, we'll send it to all channels. So that's working correctly. And here in Cubasis, you see Cubasis automatically gives you an audio track for Nano Studio that's being routed through Audio Bus. So as you can see there's the routing for that track. But once again, I don't want to record audio. I just want to record MIDI right now. Eventually, we'll want to take the MIDI and record it to audio. Okay, so we'll remove the audio track. Leaves us with just the MIDI track. Right now, it's hooked up to its own internal piano patch. So if I take the keys here and I try to play on the keyboard, it's not hooked up to Nano Studio. It's hooked up to its own internal sampler or synth. So here's your output, MIDI output options. Now I've learned that it can be different for different applications. Some applications, they work with virtual MIDI, work best with virtual MIDI, I should say. And some, for some reason, only work if I select the name of the application itself. In most cases, virtual MIDI is the one that worked best. I should say right now that Interapp audio for MIDI has not been working for me at all on this setup. Until that's ready for prime time, I'm going to stick to regular virtual MIDI. So it's going to transmit, just to make things simple, on all channels. It's worth saying right now that having a lot of MIDI applications running at the same time is not something that is going to be very common with this setup, I don't think. The reason being is because there is no easy way to save the dependency state of Cubasis and all of its apps that are running. Each app runs separately. So if you save your project and then later come back and open it up, you'll have to individually open up all those other apps and then call up those same patches all over again. So for the most part, the way I've been using it is having sort of ad hoc MIDI scenarios. And then once I'm satisfied with the MIDI sequencing, I pretty much immediately export it into an audio format and remove the MIDI track, or at least disconnect it so it's able to be used on another track. So I'm going to go back to Cubase to record my MIDI part connected to Nano Studio. And you can hear the patch being played. However, as you can also hear, that piano sound's underneath. The piano sound that's being generated from Cubasis itself. So we'll remove that because we don't want that anymore. Go into the mixer. That's the channel that handles the piano. So we'll remove that entirely. There you go. We no longer have that piano sound in the way. And now we'll try to record a little MIDI part. I'm on a bit of a delay, so it's going to sound sloppy. That's okay, we can quantize afterwards. So with the indicator, making a selection for a loop bar, we will record something really simple. That was very sloppy, but that's okay. We can use quantize to fix that. So using the selection option, select all the MIDI data, and with quantize, we'll want to quantize it to quarter notes, hit quantize. That's roughly probably how it should have been. So for editing MIDI and audio on Cubasis, it's much the same. You have pinch to zoom, which I find kind of buggy. It's not nearly as fluid as Nano Studios or even GarageBand, a lot of the other options out there. It's probably the least developed feature of Cubasis. So right now, if I want to zoom in on that right indicator, and I use the pinch command, you see it kind of trails off to the right. So you kind of have to find yourself zooming in a bit, moving it, zooming in a little more, moving it again. So that could be a little bit tricky. So for editing MIDI data or audio, much the same, creating a edit such as splitting parts. You have an undo. If I say I want to just select one note and I want to split it there, works pretty good. I use the eraser, take off that little part at the end there. So in that regard, it's much like the full-featured DAW version Cubase. You can select all the MIDI notes and move them up and down. See, again, the pinch to zoom is not working. You select one of the notes and you can transpose it up and down like that. So right now, what we can do with this MIDI data is we're going to pretty much bounce it down into an audio track. So I'm going to add an audio track, and for routing, I'll have the input coming in from Audio Bus and select Nano Studio. It's pretty much just that simple. And I'll move the indicator over here so we can collect the tail end of that audio, put the indicator back to the beginning and hit record. Didn't need the count in, but oh well. All right, and there's our audio. So at this point, we don't really need that MIDI track anymore. So we can free it up to use with another synthesizer or another application, whatever you want. I'm going to mute it. There's the audio. Now, once again, the MIDI functionality can be kind of buggy. Different apps have their own way of sending and receiving MIDI data, so you have to get into each app's settings and see what works with Cubasis. But in general, I find that sticking with virtual MIDI is the best option, and sending on all channels instead of selecting individual channels will make that easier to see if it's working or not. And I also noticed that drum machines send MIDI data typically on channel 10. So if you do have only a channel 1 or channel 2 selected for that, then you'll probably find that that's why you can't hear your drum machine. So for the channel now, in the mixer, for the audio part for Nano Studio, we have typical channel strip settings of panning, the fader, mute, solo, and we have somewhat limited effects, insert effects available to us. You also have send effects, which operate much the same way, but send, of course, the wet mix back into your mix. And if you want, they also have a media bay where you can have MIDI parts preset, or you can use the MIDI parts that come with it. There's your projects that you can save to, mix downs that you've created. And that's about it. There's a lot of robust settings for this application, and there's probably a lot more to come. It's still early in development for music making iOS applications, but in time I expect a lot of these things to be ironed out and papered over. So I would score Cubasis as it is right now a 9 out of 10.